Hi everyone, welcome to the webinar. Let's wait a half minute to get started. Okay. Um, how about we get started now? Boys, are you ready? Yeah, okay, great. Hi everyone. So welcome to the GeoHealth November webinar. So today we have three wonderful speakers. We're gonna talk about geospatial data visualization. So the two of today's speakers are the winners of our GeoHealth Data Visualization competition. So this is a competition hosted by the Early Career Researcher Committee at GeoHealth. We call for submissions targeted at early career researchers in this field. The submission time was hosted during the late summer. We received 15 submissions in total, and the participants are pretty diverse. The majority of them are graduate students, and we also have submissions from faculties and postdocs, and most of them are from North America, and there are also submissions from China and Nigeria. We thank for all of the participants for their contribution, and based on the evaluation of ECR committee and the three senior scholars at GeoHealth, so we select three winners, and you will see the winning work of two of winners today. And another winner, he is on traveling today, so he cannot join. But if you are interested in looking at those submissions, looking up their work, they are available on the GeoHealth social media, such as the X. And we also have our guest speaker, Dr. Ambrogio today. Dr. Ambrogio is the manager of the Sharing Science Program at the AGU. She's also an expert in geospatial data visualization. She will tell you how to present your research work in most interesting and most efficient the visualization in the visualization approach. And if you are interested in more of her story, there's a link with her profile. And I think, sorry, I need to sharing. And I am one of today's webinar moderator. I'm Shane Zhang. I'm assistant professor at the Bayer Cultural Medicine at Houston. And we have another moderator here. Maurice, do you want to introduce? Yeah.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Maurice Usmani. I'm one of the moderators. Even though Zoom is going to take care of the entire webinar today, I'll just be sitting here. So I'm assistant professor at UAB, University of Alabama at Birmingham, and I think we should not waste more time on us. Let's start with the webinar.
Yeah, sure. So we can start with Matt. Matt is one of our winners of the competition. Yes, Matt, please show your work.
Thanks so much. Privileged to be here. I'm really excited to talk about some of the cool visualizations I made as part of this competition. So again, thanks for having me. I am an ORISE postdoc based at the US EPA in the Office of Research and Development. So I do a lot of research based on kind of like nutrient pollution and kind of the statistical modeling perspective of that. But I have a background and a lot of interest in kind of like metal and metalloid pollution and kind of the anthropogenic sources of those throughout the United States. So basically today, what I'm going to be talking about is, this visualization I made that really encapsulates kind of capturing both the spatial and temporal aspects of coal production across the United States over time. So essentially, the long story short about this is I was working with a colleague on a book chapter focused on lead isotopes and kind of the different sources of lead pollution in the environment. And something that we were, talking about was how coal is kind of sometimes an not as well like characterized potential pollutant of lead in the environment. It's not, as prolific as, lead from past leaded gasoline or lead from leaded paint and things like that. But coal combustion, it does contribute, trace elements that are pollutants into the environment, including some amounts of lead. So as we're kind of working on this chapter, he shared some really cool and I think interesting data with me that I wanted to dive into a little bit more, sourced from the USGS and the U.S. I think Department of Energy did some consolidation of that research as well in a shareable public format. So in essence, we know that coal production it's really changed a lot over time across the U.S. And I could see that really readily apparent in these data sets that, again, spanned 100 plus years. But I want to think about how can we better visualize and so that we can interpret maybe how these production sources have changed, because it has, direct environmental implications, right? Based on both magnitude and the location of where it's produced, that might have implications for environmental pollution, right? What might be, where might be there be concentrated emissions, and maybe where might lead or other trace metals and metalloids have, accumulated over time, or where might have people been exposed to, atmospheric particulate matter that could have they could have been breathing in when it was in large scale production in different areas that could have led to respiratory issues, right? There's a lot of implications that better quantifying and kind of visualizing this data, both spatially and temporally, could help with. So basically what I'm going to do now is leave the presentation to go to the actual interactive visual that I built. So I basically built this. Let me go to it. Hopefully you all can still see my screen here. There should be basically a web page that's illustrating with two different figures the changes in U.S. coal production by state on annually from all the way back to 1800 until 2022. So again, over 200 years of data here that I was able to compile together and try to show in this interactive visual format so that folks can kind of better see, like, both, again, changes over time temporally, as well as the geospatial aspect, the spatially, how much does this vary. And what was very clear from kind of looking at these graphics that I developed was that over time, coal production really changed from being really prolific in like the Pennsylvania kind of East Coast to shifting towards the West Coast of the United States. Particularly now, you could kind of see as these plots are changing how out west in like Wyoming and Montana, they're really kind of Wyoming in particular is like the epicenter right now of coal production in the United States, whereas originally it started more in kind of Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Virginia. And again, understanding these shifts in production are things that might lead to research questions such as how have maybe pollutant remnants from coal production and combustion left an environmental footprint. It might allow researchers to look at maybe sediment cores and see, do the production stats kind of line up with data that you find in the environment through like sediment cores or things like that you're trying to kind of trace pollution over time and compile potential environmental risk or ecological degradation. So this was a lot of fun that I got to do. And essentially, one thing that I wanted to kind of conclude with that I think is really interesting is that both of the templates that I kind of used to produce these graphs are pre-existing in this really cool free online platform called Flourish, which allows users for free. There's a premium version, of course, but for free, you can kind of use pre-existing templates to kind of import and tweak your own data to kind of show what I think could be some really cool and effective visuals. So that was kind of the foundation that I used to help kind of customize and tweak these visualizations. And then I kind of just built it into like a WordPress website so that folks can visit freely and easily to see the different changes. And the last thing I'll point about the actual visualizations themselves is that they are synced to kind of simultaneously run together and show the changes over time and the magnitude of coal production changes over time. So these circles are basically growing as production increases in the state, and these bars essentially get longer as production increases in the states. And then the bottoms are just line graphs that kind of show production over time as well. But collectively, hopefully, it really helps people visualize what's happening over time. And you can pause each one too if you want to kind of like slow it down for a second and see, okay, this, at this point in time, around the 1925, most of the coal production in the US was, in this kind of, East Coast, Midwest area, and things like that. So again, it was a lot of fun. And I guess at this point, I think I have some time to take questions. I'll leave this up real quick if you just want to jot my email down to you if you want to ask any more questions about environmental pollution or where I got the data from. So thank you very much.
Hey Matt, I have one question. So the portal, it's really interesting. It's really it was really good. So like you have two parts, the two components, the left side and the right side, where you have one where you have a spatial map, the other one where you have a temporal map. So like was it intentionally? It seems like temporally they were not aligned. So like the right side has a different time frame that's going on, and on the left side it was like a different time frame. For example, the snapshot that you have right now, it's 2013 on the other side, and for the spatial map, it was 1820 something, 1925 or something.
Yeah,
And
so they should match. I think just when I paused it there, things got a little wonky, but you
okay,
can kind of see now that they're
yeah,
very
now it's
yeah, so they're matching the kind of you can kind of trace on the bottom, which I think is cool, where the line is kind of moving and showing like on the x-axis the different years, and it's kind of they're basically tracking simultaneously. The one tricky thing with building these visualizations is that sometimes just like pausing at an opportune time or not refreshing sometimes causes things to get a little messed up. But that was a great point and something you have to be careful of when trying to make sure you're comparing, maybe one side to the other and making sure there's not that temporal mismatch. So yeah, that was a great eye. Thanks for bringing that up.
But this is really great. I'm teaching a course that is on sustainable smart cities, and we are looking into one of the component is this, like coal production and like how it has changed in the country. But yeah, it's a great one. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Giselle made a question in the chat box. Can you repeat the name of the tool you use?
Oh, repeat the name of the two,
Yeah.
sources that I got the data from. Was that the question?
Sorry, no, what tool you use to do the visuals?
Yeah, the tool. So it's called Flourish. It's basically if you just kind of like Google, Flourish data visualizations, it should come up pretty quickly. You can create like a free account where you can make a ton of different data visualization graphs, like both maps as well as like charts and things. And then obviously, like most things, platforms they do have like a premium version where you could do a ton of even more stuff. But I found the free version you can do pretty much most things. And so yeah. And I can put that in the chat too for everyone as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next speaker, Giselle, sorry, I'm terrible on pronouncing people's name. Giselle Inchwarera, am I correct? Oh, you're mute, sorry. Anyway, the time is yours, so please show your work.
Yeah, no worries. Share screen. Yeah, no. Thank you so much for this invitation, and I'm really happy to share this space with you. My name is Giselle Guzman Echavarria, a PhD candidate at the School of Geographical Sciences and Urban Planning at Arizona State University. And in the visualization that I picked to participate in this context comes from this publication from last year. And then first I wanted to thank all the co-authors. This was a really like a collaborative work, really fun to do. And I was the person who was in charge of all the code and visualizations. So I had plenty of time to think through how to do the outreach of this work. So the motivation behind this work was like the state of art of extreme heat effects on health, how this aspect has been assessed in climate change related literature. So we know that extreme heat is killing a lot of people worldwide, and all of these deaths are preventable. But this is a hazard that is like it's not, it has different characteristics that others being visible, invisible, and like now also like it has different origins, because also is a problem that is directed with climate change, but also because there is more urbanization. Regarding the methods, there was an identification. There was a previous identification that is really important to account who is exposed to the heat and how those impacts can affect people in different ways. So that's an uncertainty, source of uncertainty that is not was not accounted properly in climate change related analysis. And if there were included, then were oversimplified. So in this research, the objective was then put together, bring to the same room scientists from different fields to propose a new approach to assess survivability, and also introduce a new approach to look into livability to heat, because in heat and health studies, we should go beyond that, assessing if people live or die, but also how people is going to continue living in extreme heat. Okay, so the method that we use for this study was we based this in the human heat balance equation. So we need we embrace that a human body is exchanging heat all the time in different forms, but also we are a source of heat. So it's like to maintain the internal temperature, we interact with the environment. So it's like we are producing heat, but also we have a restriction for the environment then to keep our internal temperature is stable. So the goal for this new livability approach was to estimate what is the maximum metabolic heat we can produce by doing some activity, then we are safe to not increase our internal temperature. But then the results of this model are in watts, which is energy per time. And to do outreach of this, maybe this is a metric that cannot say so much for a wide public. So we choose to express this the results of the livability approach in terms of METs, which is kind of like the equivalent on metabolic, like the metabolic, sorry, it's like it's a number that express that expenditure on the metabolic production, but linked to directly to activities. So 1 MET is equivalent to be resting, and then when you increase the number of METs, then that is the expression of most extraneous activities. So now we were able to answer how can people live and be active in extreme heat environments. So this was the winning graph. In this graph, this is the fourth plot of the paper, in which we have panels divided by the type of environment and the type of person, in which we include the result. We here assess different temperature and environment, temperature and humidity conditions for young adults and older adults exposed to conditions with and without sun exposure. And then here we spread we put all these results also in context of with the limit of the heat stroke death. So if you can see here, I'm gonna try to open the laser pointer. Okay, I'm not finding it, but The fuchsia line is kind of the threshold in which a person could for sure die on a heat stroke death if they are exposed to those heat conditions by 3 hours sustained. And then, like, regarding the conditions are less hot, then you can start doing more activity in a safe way. So the main takeaways was like younger adults can work harder under all conditions, and the lowest values on the livability metric were like lowered for conditions that were hotter and drier, and for older population. Also here we provide a context, as I mentioned, with the results of the survivability assessment. That was the other part of the graph. And also we provide context regarding previous research. So here to end this presentation, I wanted to mention, like, for conceiving this graph, I was inspired for some principles of feminist data visualization. I had the opportunity to attend to workshop organized by AAG, in which, like, in Science That workshop, I start thinking always, like, what is the message I want to communicate, and like who is the public, and like if, like, I always try to conceive my graphs thinking that there is someone behind there is a reader that is also a human that can has the same like that can embody and can adopt the graphics. For example, here in the same, like, one shift here was like we choose to build the color map also with icons, kind of like people then can see the color bar and not think in the number but in the action. And the focus also was like the red values are the highest because is how much is higher the heat produced by us as humans, not higher the heat produced by the environment. So yeah, it was kind of that shape that the user of this graph will feel like they were thinking in themselves as they were looking at the graph. Okay, that's kind of like all that I wanted to share to you today, and I'm happy to receive questions.
Wonderful, excellent. Any questions from the audience? Okay. We can move to. Thank you, Giselle. We can move to our guest speaker, Dr. Olivia Ambrogio.
Sure. And I'll give me just a moment, and then please, moderators, let me know if I've made the same mistake again with the visuals, and I'll make sure that I hide that little screen so that everybody can see everything. Oh, yeah, I see. Let me see what I can do here. All right, I hope that that's clear for everyone. First, thank you so much for inviting me. I've loved seeing these beautiful visuals. They're really impressive. Just very briefly, I'm the Assistant Director of AG's Sharing Science program, and our whole goal is to help people move from what's in this cartoon here to really being able to distill their science into the messages that matter for the specific audience that they really want to reach. And that is such a huge part of any kind of science communication, including visuals, is thinking about those audiences. We do this in a lot of ways that I will not bother with now because we don't have a lot of time. So yes, I'm Olivia Ambrogio, Assistant Director of Sharing Science. I use she, her pronouns. My background is in biology, so I got my PhD studying the sex lives of marine snails. This is sort of a cartoon I drew a while ago trying to illustrate what my science was about. And I had a rather circuitous route into science communication that I'm happy to talk with people about at another time. So I want to start by saying I may have snuck in, I hope you won't feel under false pretenses, but I really, although I think things like graphical abstracts and sort of direct data visualizations are so crucial, and I'm happy to talk more of them when we have time for the panel discussion. I really want to talk about the use of visuals and multimedia more broadly to communicate science and scientific ideas, both to other researchers and to wider audiences. So I'm going to be talking about a lot of different ways of using visuals that are not exclusively about creating figures to share data. But I hope that they will help to inspire those who are here. So visuals in general are really valuable in a lot of different ways within communicating science, again, to the scientific community and outside of it. So they're really great for talking through methods for people. So for example, when I've been trying to talk about using wine mazes to determine if snails are using their sense of smell to locate something, I might draw a visual like this and then walk people through it and what it all means. They're really also a great way of introducing equipment, whether it's photos with labels, drawings with labels, etc. I have found that in both formal talks and public engagement activities, people are very fascinated to see what's involved in different aspects of research. And so this can be a nice kind of introduction for people and providing a bit of initial background on what you're doing and how you're doing. It can also be used for adding humor. This was my version of why the brief squid got its name, my just little cartoon about how that could have happened. And of course, they're great at clarifying concepts that might be extremely complicated to describe just through words. So I really like this infographic of the sizes of the largest of each species of different ocean organisms. And I really like that in each row, you see you have this diver that's in there for scale, so that you see not just their sizes compared to each other, but compared to humans, which is a really nice, fairly universal scale reference. And visuals in general, again, in providing the larger context of the kind of science that you're talking about, can really add emotional impact. If you're trying to share, for example, the effects of natural hazards, for example, or conversely, if you're trying to share the exhilaration of bringing a lot of people together to engage in research. Having that emotional connection really helps build a better relationship with an audience often and gets them invested. And of course, increasing visibility and representation. So I want to give some examples of visuals that, again, span a very broad range, but all relate to being able to communicate scientific information. There's a lot of really interesting art from data. So these are examples from Jill Pelto. And on the left, you can see that these are measurements of the increase in temperature over time as related to sea ice melt. On the right, we have forest degradation. And so each of these points on this figure, admittedly without axes in this case, demonstrates a loss of forest habitat, but because of the illustrations, we're seeing both what is being lost and the effect that that is having on species that depend upon it. For those who aren't as interested in creating illustrations, but still want something a little more visually dynamic to relate to their work, I really encourage using flowcharts. I personally love this one by Danny Rabaiotti, which is about, should I ask my question? I think it should be shared at every conference ever. I will just make a note that most of the time, no, you should not ask that question. Not to say about today, I'm sure we're going to have a very different kind of discussion. Another example by Rosemary Moscow. This is a really useful flowchart for if you find a baby songbird out of the nest, what you should do, except for the jokey part that is you have a dromaeosaur. So again, adding a little humor that helps to increase interest. Or this one that I made a while ago for my wife, is this my circus and are these my monkeys? Another way that I think it has often been perceived as being more a public non-specialist facing means of communication are zines. These are mini magazines typically made by folding a single piece of paper so that they can be reproduced multiple times into between 6 and 8 pages. So it's nice in that you have a small constrained space in which you have to think about your message very carefully. And often there are visual elements to it. I personally think that if we required these at conferences as well to hand out, that people would actually learn a lot more about each other's work and be more engaged with it. But again, that's just me talking. I do really encourage you to check these out. The Small Science Collective has a vast library of examples of zines. And then there's field or lab sketching. And this is connected to this whole area of nature journaling, which is a sort of interest that is worldwide and quite popular these days, that has to do with using illustrations to capture observations about the natural world. And you can see that they can be very sort of suggestive, like these here are the shapes of clouds or the colors of sky. They can be more specific. This is a nature journaler who, has drawn at the moment of life, animals moving around near her. Again, this can also be really useful if you create sketches during the course of your work, whether it's a field-related location or whether it's lab work, because this helps to, when you share these as part of your methods and process, it opens a window for people into what you're doing that can be really illuminating. Another way to sort of in an analog form share some spatial data are these things called event maps. I think that Hannah Henchman, whose illustration this is, coined that term. And essentially the idea is that you have a map, whether a very detailed one or very sketched out, very sketchy, and then at points along it, you illustrate with detailed or not detailed drawings and also words what you have observed or encountered or recorded in those different areas. So it's yet another way of creating a visual means of the knowledge that you've gathered from a landscape. This is an example of one that I made a number of years ago in my old neighborhood about animal sightings that I'd had or encounters. And I'm an amateur photographer too, so these were all my photos of different things. And you can see I also made these little cartoony drawings. So you can see this is much more sketchy, and I just, printed a Google map. But these can be fun ways too of sort of leading people through what you're seeing where. And I also really encourage as inspiration for broader communication, looking at nonfiction children's books, because these are some pretty incredible examples of how people have figured out what are the concepts we want to convey and how do we convey them in really fascinating, memorable, and effective ways. I also encourage you to check out the hashtag 30-day chart challenge on X every April. This is run where there's a prompt per day and people just submit visuals, and they can be everything from highly technical visuals to much simpler one like this, different colors of M&Ms observed in a particular bag. And what I love about it is that you can see how effective both the very simple and the more complex visualizations can be in sharing information. Storytelling through photos is also a really powerful way to convey more information. I encourage you to check out the online magazine Biographic, which has a lot of photo-based articles around scientific research topics. And then, of course, story maps. Esri, the ArcGIS Story Maps Gallery, have fabulous examples of the kinds of stories that people have created by combining GIS information with photography, with sort of public-facing scientific information about the research to really create a full narrative around a particular discovery or area of study. Again, storytelling through comics. This is Rosemary Moscow, the cartoonist I mentioned earlier. I personally really love this cartoon of hers, and I share it sometimes with people with kids, and sometimes they appreciate it and sometimes they don't. I don't know, I thought it was funny. But she has some really great climate comics, and I won't read through it now because I want, us to still have some time. But she has this one on thin ice talking about growing up in Ottawa where the canal always froze over in winter, and it was sort of this cultural phenomenon. And then it didn't freeze over. And, this effect of climate change, she connects it to sort of the nostalgia and sense of an entire area, acknowledging that this is clearly not the worst effect of climate change, but how also maybe all of these things together can help build in us an incentive to work to address it. And what I really love about comics is that they let you sort of see the storyboarding process happening. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. There are also some other great data visualizations that can be, again, a little comic-y, like the image at the top right here, or more animation or GIF-based. And I just want to mention that this one on the lower left that was created by Irene Crisologo, this was made in PowerPoint. So you can treat each slide of a PowerPoint like a frame and then export that as a GIF. So that's a really nice way to create animations without having to get special software. There's also storytelling through a mixture of video and audio. So our AGU podcast, Third Pod from the Sun, does this with these things called audiograms, where you have an image over which you can have a clip of audio with captions. And I'll just show a tiny
There are times where it's hard, and there are times when, like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There are times when being disabled sucks. Like, I'm not going to gloss over and say, like, oh, if you just find your path or find your mission, because that is garbage. Like, there are amazing things and awful things about, this whole journey. But I think the takeaway that I want people to think about is you can let experiences like this break you or make you.
So that's done using Headliner, and I'll be happy to share that link later, which lets you create these sort of mixtures. And it also lets you do some simple video editing as well, if that's something that seems intriguing. I also want to say that you can, in addition to visuals, create atmosphere through audio. So for example, these are just recordings that I've made at different times. Nighttime in the yard. And you can share some of this too to give people a more immersive sense of what you're talking about. Oops, get through these other examples. And then there are lots of ways of doing storytelling through video. Again, I think right now, maybe I'll just share links later in the chat because I don't want to spend all our time showing these examples to you. But there are some great ways to think about how you can communicate more about what you're experiencing or what the data have shown through visuals that also include you, the researcher. Because particularly for public audiences, non-specialist audiences, but even for those in other fields, I think there's a real interest in seeing these elements of the personal as part of the work. So I do encourage you to consider that as well. When you're making different kinds of visuals, one of the things you want to think about is decide what story you're telling, what message you're conveying. So just some examples from photography. This was a story, let's say, of Washington, D.C. in the spring. Did I need to have that monument, the Jefferson Monument, in focus? No. You just get enough of an idea that here are monuments and cherry blossoms. This was a few years ago. My mother and my daughter both looking at a butterfly together. Do I care that you can't see the butterfly? No, because the story in that moment was about their mutual engagement in nature. Or this that I call the culprit and the crime, showing the subject and its effect on its environment. So when we think about this from a photographic perspective, for example, it helps you determine how you're going to frame what you want to share. So for example, in this case, this is the artist and their work. So it's not a close-up of a person's face. It's the artist and their workspace and the actual art they've produced all together, because that's what it's about. Versus if I'm taking a cute picture of my dog, I want to crop out everything else because it's not about my messy living room, right? It's about that winsome look that I'm getting. So going back to what I was saying earlier, with so many kinds of visual communication in particular, storyboarding is so valuable. And storyboarding is essentially saying, what are the ideas or messages I want to convey at different points, and what illustration or multiple illustrations and visuals am I going to need to convey that? So let's say maybe you'd say, okay, I want to talk about this research, and the first point is providing context. Here's the place that we were at. This is the landscape. This is, the background of it. And then here's what we were doing there and what we were collecting. And here's what we brought back and how we were studying it. And here's what we found out about it. Typically, you would probably want many more visuals for each of these points, right? But that's a start in kind of that arc of the story. So I'm going to skip through some of this again because I realize time is passing, but I'll give you an example from a cartoon that I made that is sci-com-ish. And it's about animals whose sizes are commonly misconceived. So you can see some of my rough drawing here because I had this idea late at night and was then trying to remember why I thought it was a good idea and what I actually wanted to convey. And then I worked on figuring out how I wanted to share this visually. And I decided that there had to be a few elements. First, I wanted in each of these images to have the label of what animal I was talking about in this little blue circle. And then I wanted to do the comparison between conception and reality, with something staying the same in both, again, for that sense of scale. So in this one with pigs, you see the conception versus reality. Puffins, conception versus reality. And then I realized that for a couple of the ideas, I was going to have to change to a vertical composition, but I kept the general elements the same. So we have sea otters, conception versus reality. And then again, I added a bit of humor, shower spiders, conception versus reality. And I bring this up, this one has less of a narrative, right? It's just a series more like, but I did still have to think about how do I want to frame this, in what order, with what visuals where, and what will end it. And in this case, the sort of resolution was the humor. So as you think about storyboarding with whatever you're trying to convey, whether it's sort of straight data visuals, whether it's a graphical abstract, whether it's something more involved, you want to think about elements of story, which I can also share some resources about, and think about what the context is, what the major messages are and the ideas are that you're trying to convey. What kinds of visuals would help to convey that? And then what sort of transitions might you need? Additional visuals, additional elements to tie this all together so that it feels natural. Even again, in one or two images, you might want to be thinking about the story, the main messages that you're hoping people to take out of it that can inform how you frame what you're designing. And with that, thank you very much. I look forward to all of us getting a chance to discuss all of this some more.
Thank you so much. Actually, I feel a little pressure because I feel like to be a good scientist, we should also be a good artist. There are a lot of interesting work you show us. Yeah. So, any questions from audience? There's a question from Yichun. Yichun, do you wanna unmute and speak out your questions?
Sure. Can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Olivia, for your wonderful presentation, and I really learned a lot from your talk. And my question is that with more and more AI tools emerging in this year, what's your opinion on using AI-generated visual aids in public presentations and storytelling? For example, if we are talking about wildfires, do you think it's a good idea to use AI to create a cartoon image of a wildfire in our slides?
Thank you for the question. I'm not going to try to create some sort of blanket statement one way or the other, to dictate your decisions. I think, it's always going to be more nuanced and involved. And I do know from a lot of people that I know that they have found AI to be very helpful in helping sort of create prompts and develop outline ideas for them around different things. I will say some of the challenges that I have heard from the sort of natural illustration space is that AI is, using a lot of other people's images in order to generate things without caring about intellectual property or copyright. And so it's a question of, are we essentially stealing from people who make their living through this by making use of AI? And again, probably not in every case, but that is an element to consider. I would also say, I'm hearing more, and I'm sure some of you are much better informed than I am about this, but that the environmental cost of AI can sometimes be very high, right? The amount of energy that it costs to use AI can be really considerable. So when we're thinking from a sustainability perspective as well, I just think that's also something that you have to examine. So I would personally say the best first step would be to, if you don't want to create something yourself, to look for existing free resources. So a lot of US federal agencies, like the USGS, for example, all of their images are free for you to share so long as you attribute them and you're not making money off of them. So I think if first you can find something that's in the Creative Commons for sharing, that might be the better first step.
Yeah, thank you for your answer. It's really insightful and I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. And the other two speakers, Giselle and Matt, feel free to open your camera. We now move to a panel discussion session. So following Yi-Chun's question, how do you two feel about using AI to show your research work?
I guess I can start. Again, I agree with a lot of what Dr. Ambrogio said. I think there is some nuance to it. I know it's so where I work at the US EPA right now, there's a lot of restrictions on how to use that generative AI because of some uncertainties with like security and stuff of like, stuff you feed it, it's like training and learning off of. So there's a lot of, particularly in government agencies, like caution with like what we're sharing with the AI models to that they're building their algorithms and stuff off of. I think that for as a learning tool for how to create maybe visualizations, there's, I think, from a coding perspective, there's like some really cool opportunity from AI where it's like just a more efficient way to kind of maybe learn the foundation of code that you can write to like maybe generate graphs and figures. So from that perspective, I think it could be like very helpful for if you're coding R or like Python or these different softwares. Like I think it's really nice to provide that starting template of code, but again, with a lot of those caveats that were just mentioned, like just being careful of like how much you share and things like that are important considerations. So yeah.
And in my opinion, like it can be a really easy to think, like it's a really great tool from the perspective that really makes life easy. For example, especially like for people who don't draw well. For example, I'm a person that my draws are awful, but I'm really good at modifying images. So I will be kind of captivated to use it, but at the same time, I have realized that some AIs also perpetuate a lot of like biases with racism and discriminate, like some things that have learned the algorithm. For example, if you provide Latin names, they assume you are certain is like, yeah, they has a bias. So I think we need to be really careful with the use of AIs on that sense. But for coding has make life easier, and I see the value of like people who are not coders. They find themselves more comfortable to learn how to code using AI.
Yeah, I agree. So AI is good to give you some ideas, help you to learn, but cannot to replace your intelligence. So just any questions from audience or comments? Okay. So yeah, there are a few chats in the chat box. And if you or both you and the audience, if you want to add something, you can just put on in the chat box. So I'm gonna ask another question. So when we read a papers or read a research, like research or review of publications or non-scientific publication, there are a lot of graphs. And sometimes they can make mistake. Do you think there's any common mistake or something like we should really pay attention when showing our research work? Yeah, Matt, you want to say something?
Yeah, I guess I could get us started. I guess having both like peer reviewed and gone through like, internal co-author review and stuff on a lot of different things. Like oftentimes I think what I see with like, sometimes charts and graphs and like in literature that can be like misrepresented is like things as simple as like, that, having like just really weird like color schematics or like basically just not things that take away from the story that you're trying to tell in a way that's like distracting, whether it be like honestly things as small as like the font being too small to read or like the colors wrong. Like those things might seem like small, minute details, but if it's like one of those where it causes extra energy from like the reader to like, get through those visual impediments, it can be, inhibit like and absorbing the story. And something else too is I think like what I try to advise people when I'm like reviewing papers and stuff is like think outside the box with like visuals of data and things, right? Like I think a lot of times people like, will kind of gravitate towards like the standard, like, oh, like let's do a box plot or like bar charts and like things. And while those can be effective visuals, like there are a bunch of like alternatives or different ways to think about visually representing the data that might be, even more beneficial. Honestly, like that Flourish website that I shared, I think there's like 50 to 100 different types of like graphs and figures, and like that can be overwhelming. But the basic premise is this, like, think outside the box of how you're articulating your data so that you don't either oversimplify or make things too complicated for your reader. And I'll drop in the chat too. There's a really cool kind of visual guide that I've shared when I've like, taught some webinar things on data visualization tools, where it's like a kind of a tree map of like, here are the types of data that I have, here are the questions that I have, what are the options? So I'll try to find that and drop it into the chat, but I think that's a good way that, people can maybe try to navigate the best way to show their data through visualizations.
Yeah, sorry, can you repeat the question? I get lost for a second.
Oh, just so I'll ask, do you think there are like common mistake we should try to avoid when making graphs or visualizing our research work?
Yeah, I think first, for me, kind of my principle is like in a paper, if you like think if only seeing the graphs, unable to understand what is happening in the paper. because sometimes like has I don't remember if it was Olivia. Yeah, I think it was Olivia show. Like sometimes, like in all the time, we have few time to look for the literature, and sometimes, you can judge that paper is a good one, just starting for the figures, and many people is just going to look at the abstract, the conclusions, and then the figures. So if you can yourself make your figures and explanatory, that will be kind of the ideal goal. And has Matthew say, like, the simple the better, then, like, because you also kind of like you are being the person who are distilling what are the main takeaways or your research.
Thank you. Actually, I had some difficulty about making graph for my papers. Sometimes I make a graph in a very low resolution, and sometimes you see it's high resolution, but when you insert them into Word documents or submit to the journal, it become blur. So do you have any recommended tools like we can generate high resolution graphs or pretty graphs? Or in general, do you recommend us to do PowerPoint or Adobe or iPad? Any tools you recommend?
I have problems with the same. Like, honestly, I really love graphical abstracts, but they just ask for really small figures that, like, the number of pixels never is enough to put the information I need to put, and I'm not a graphical designer, so it's a mess sometimes. For example, was with the GeoHealth with this context. They asked me to put the figure in 300 pixels for, I don't remember how much pixels were, but I was not able. Like, I tried my best with Illustrator, and it was not possible. So sometimes, like, yeah, we need to acknowledge that we are not graphical designers, but there is a lot of YouTube tutorials that you can see to be able, like, I made my graphs in Python, and then I try to do modifications if I can in in PowerPoint, but sometimes I need just Adobe for moving, like, minor details.
Yeah, I was talking about the graph abstract. Yeah, I will also struggle with that. Does Olivia and Matt has any suggestions?
Yeah, I don't know. I struggle. I'm with representing things graphically and through art as well. The graphical abstract submissions that are required for journals are the thing I struggle with the most by far. I found, like, what a helpful resource for me is, like, there's actually folks like at the US EPA where I'm at that are like graphic designer folks that I'll collaborate with just to, like, help me give an additional perspective on, like, things that I just don't are harder for me to think about, just because I approach things definitely more analytical. I'm starting to learn Adobe Illustrator to, like, kind of help, tweak things like that I can't really make as, like, exactly what I want from, like, a coding software and stuff. And that helps me, like, kind of at least make things a little bit more, I guess, visually appealing to a wider audience as opposed to, like, just like a templated output from, like, a coding language or something. But it is a struggle. But I think, like, just asking as many perspectives and from as possible when trying to generate graphics does help a lot, because, like, the more ideas and people you have looking at things, the less likely you are to, like, miss something like a colorblind, not friendly palette, or, like, things that are too small in the text and whatnot. So.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, you know, if as you are making grant proposals and similar, if you can put in money for working with some sort of illustrator consultant, that's going to be immensely valuable. I also encourage people to check out gnsi.org. That's the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators. They have a lot of sort of resources and connections to different people as well. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that one platform ever solves everybody's needs, and I think it depends on what people find most useful and intuitive to them. I agree with you that oh my gosh, the resolution issues, that's a whole thing. But I would say that I think there's a difference between straight figures that are sharing all of the data in a way that people can rapidly absorb versus a graphic abstract, where I would argue that one should err on the side of simplifying, because it's really more about the visual communication of the ideas rather than the actual graphical representation of all of the data, if that makes sense. And so figuring out ways to do that, again, with a collaborator if possible, or through asking people, does this look better? Does this look more clear? I think can be really helpful.
Thank you so much. I think we are running a little bit out of time, but I really appreciate those tips about visualizing our research work. Moise, do you have any questions?
No, I think like we covered all the questions and all the corners, and we are running out of time. The only thing is like, please share this information. We will have the recordings available for this webinar. So whoever is not able to attend today, they will have access like through the link. So please share that. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye.